The porch light had burned out weeks ago, and neither of them had bothered to fix it. In the near dark, Elias Whitfield stared at his own hand wrapped around hers and realized he had no memory of reaching for it. "I'm 72 years old," he said, his voice cracking somewhere between apology and confession. "I'm too old for this. Too old to start something I can't finish." Margaret Doyle didn't pull away. She didn't even blink. She simply looked down at their joined hands resting on the armrest between two folding chairs, then back up at him, and smiled the way people smile when they already know the ending of a story someone else is still afraid to read. "Then why," she asked quietly, "are you holding my hand?" Elias had no answer. And that terrified him more than anything had in 4 years. Before we continue, if you believe love doesn't retire just because a heart gets tired, please like this video, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, leave a comment, and subscribe to Midnight Tales. 3 months earlier, Elias Whitfield had a routine, and a routine was the only thing keeping him upright. He woke at 6, made 1 cup of coffee instead of 2, folded a blanket that hadn't been slept under in years, and walked to Ashford Community Garden by 7:15, where he sat on the same bench beneath the same maple tree and did absolutely nothing at all. His wife, Eleanor, had died 4 years earlier. Cancer, quiet and merciless, the kind that gives you enough warning to prepare and not nearly enough time to actually do it. Elias had been in the hospital cafeteria buying a coffee he didn't even want when it happened. 7 minutes. That was all it took. He had walked back into the room to find the machine still, the nurses already moving with the practiced calm of people who had seen this before, and Eleanor's hand, still warm, already alone. He never told anyone about those 7 minutes. Not his son, who called every second Sunday out of obligation more than love. Not the grief counselor he'd seen exactly twice. He carried it the way some men carry a limp, visible only if you knew to look for it. On his wrist, he still wore a plain leather-strapped watch, though it had stopped ticking the week Eleanor died. He never had it repaired. He wasn't sure he wanted time to start again. Margaret Doyle first noticed him the way she noticed everything, quietly, without asking permission. She was 69, wore the same gray cardigan on rotation with a navy one, and spent her mornings at the garden refilling the little library box near the entrance with paperbacks nobody else seemed to want. To the volunteers, she was just Maggie, the woman who fed the stray cats behind the toolshed and never talked about herself. For 2 weeks, she watched Elias sit alone on that bench and touch his watch without looking at it, over and over, like a man checking a pulse that wasn't there. On the 15th morning, she sat down beside him without asking, and set a paper cup of coffee on the armrest between them. "You always look like you're waiting for someone," she said. Elias almost laughed. "I stopped waiting a long time ago." "That's not what your hands say." He looked down. He hadn't realized he was still turning the watch on his wrist. Before we go further, if this story is reminding you that grief and love can live in the same heart at once, drop a comment and let us know. Now, back to the garden. She didn't ask about the watch that day, or the next. That was the first thing Elias noticed about Margaret Doyle, she never pried. She simply showed up. A second coffee. A folding chair set an arm's length from his, close enough to speak, far enough to not intrude. Some mornings she talked about the cats. Other mornings she said nothing at all, and somehow that felt like the more generous gift. 3 weeks in, Elias finally asked why she bothered. Bothered with what? With me. Sitting with an old man who doesn't say much. Margaret considered this the way she considered most things, slowly, like she was checking her answer against something only she could see. "Because most people your age stopped being curious about anything," she said. "You're not like that. You're just scared." "I'm not scared of anything anymore. When you've buried the person you built your whole life around, there isn't much left that can frighten you." "That," Margaret said gently, "sounds like something a scared man would say." Elias didn't answer. But he didn't leave the bench either, and for him, that was as close to admitting she was right as he was capable of. What Elias didn't know, what almost no one in that garden knew, was that Margaret Doyle had once stood on stages in Vienna, Prague, and Tokyo, playing violin under the name Margarete Dorner to sold-out concert halls. A car accident at 51 had shattered 3 fingers on her left hand beyond a surgeon's ability to fully repair. She had spent 2 years relearning how to hold a fork before she ever tried to hold a bow again, and when she finally could, the sound that came out was never quite the sound that used to make grown men weep. She had sold her townhouse in the city, quietly funded a scholarship for young string players who'd never know her name, and moved into a modest apartment 3 blocks from Ashford Community Garden, where nobody recognized her and nobody needed to. She hadn't told Elias any of this. Not because she was hiding it, but because for the first time in years, someone was interested in her, not the version of her that used to matter to concert halls. The reveal came by accident, the way most true things do. It was a Tuesday. The garden was hosting its small spring fundraiser, a folding table of lemonade and a borrowed sound system, when the organizer announced with visible excitement that this year's stage renovation had been generously and anonymously funded by a local donor who wished to remain unnamed, though we understand she once played professionally. Elias turned to ask Margaret if she'd heard the rumor too, and found her staring very hard at her own hands. "Maggie," he said slowly. "Is it you?" She didn't deny it. That was answer enough. He didn't speak to her for 4 days. Not out of anger, Elias couldn't quite name what it was. Something closer to grief, strange as that sounded. As if the ordinary woman who fed stray cats and asked nothing of him had quietly disappeared, replaced by someone with a past too large for a folding chair beside a garden bench. On the 5th day, Margaret found him anyway. She sat down, uninvited as always, and set 2 coffees down instead of 1. "I'm not the person you think I am," Elias said before she could speak. "I'm just a retired mailman with a watch that doesn't work. You've played for kings and prime ministers. I don't know why you're wasting your mornings on me." "Because you never once asked me to be impressive," Margaret said. "Do you understand how long it's been since someone wanted to know me and not what I used to be able to do with my hands?" Elias looked down at her fingers, the faint scarring along 2 knuckles, the way she held her coffee cup slightly differently than most people did, something he'd noticed weeks ago and never once questioned. "What happened?" he finally asked. And for the first time, she told him everything: the accident, the surgeries, the sound that never came back the same, the townhouse she sold because it felt like a museum to a life that no longer fit her hands. "I stopped playing publicly 4 years ago," she said. "Around the same time, I imagine, that you stopped wearing a watch that told time." Elias's throat tightened. "How did you? You touch it every morning like you're checking if it started again." "It hasn't." "Which tells me you don't actually want it to." That was the morning Elias finally told her about the 7 minutes. He told her about the coffee he didn't want, the machines going still, Eleanor's hand still warm and already alone. He told her the thing he had never said out loud to another living person, that some nights he wasn't grieving Eleanor so much as grieving the men he'd been in that cafeteria, the one who had stepped away at the exact wrong moment of an otherwise devoted 31-year marriage. "I keep the watch stopped," he said, "because starting it again feels like admitting time moved on without her. Like I'm allowed to keep living and she isn't." Margaret didn't offer comfort in easy words. She simply took his hand, the same one that kept touching the watch, and held it still. "Eleanor didn't lose 31 years to 7 minutes, Elias. And you don't have to lose whatever's left of your life to them either. Before the ending, if you believe guilt can freeze a good man in place far longer than grief ever could, comment the word time below." It was 2 weeks later, on that same porch with the burned-out light, that Elias finally said the words that had been circling him for months. "I'm 72 years old. I'm too old for this. Too old to start something I can't finish." And Margaret Doyle, who had once made concert halls fall silent with 4 strings and a bow, who had rebuilt her hands and her name and her entire sense of worth from nothing, simply looked down at where his hand had already found hers in the dark, without either of them quite deciding to let it happen. "Then why," she asked, "are you holding my hand?" Elias laughed, really laughed, for the first time in 4 years, a sound that surprised even him. The next morning, he brought his watch to the little shop on 5th Street. The jeweler opened the back, cleaned the mechanism, and asked if he wanted the date reset to today. Elias thought about it for a long moment. "No," he said. "Set it to the day I met her. I think that's when my time actually started again." If this story reminded you that love doesn't check your age before it knocks, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances, and subscribe to Midnight Tales for more stories of quiet courage and unexpected love. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't falling in love for the first time. It's allowing themselves to fall again, after they were sure their heart had already closed its doors for good.